Sometimes in our life with God, we are a step behind God, and we don't follow, and that's a problem. Sometimes in our life with God, we try to get ahead of God, and therefore we think that it's God's turn to follow us, and that's also a problem. And that's our story this morning about David. When we left the story last week, you remember that David was a 12-year-old shepherd boy holding the head of Goliath, and a lot has happened since then. The hard days of civil war with Saul are over, and now David is fully enthroned in Israel as king. David has made a really good friend, Jonathan, who is Saul's son. And David is becoming the inventive, young dynamite of a ruler he was destined to be. But now the new king looks around his kingdom and he sees that the spirits are down. People are divided and the nation is discouraged. And so he twiddles his thumb and he says, what could I do to re-enthuse this nation? I need a propaganda strategy, a bold move that will reunite the people and make them laud me as their new leader. So he hatches a plan. It's a really good plan, by the way. So good of a plan that we needn't even bother God with it. I mean, why bother for God for something that you can do for yourself with just a little hard work? Why bother God in doing something so spiritual? For David's idea was the ark. Yes, the Ark of the Covenant. Where is that ark? Why isn't it here? The Ark of the Covenant, you may remember, was a box that traveled around with Israel for 40 years in the desert. It was meant to be a symbol of God's presence. For 40 years, they lugged this box through sandstorms, through spring rains, through the Jordan River. It was a solid gold-covered box. It was topped with angels bowed to each other, their wings almost touching. And inside the ark were three symbols: the golden pot of manna, the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments, and the staff. As the Israelites carried that Ark of the Covenant with them on their pilgrimage, it served as a double symbol to remind them of the invisible God that traveled with them. But you see, for the last 30 years, the ark wasn't in possession of Israel. The Philistines had it. But for the Philistines, the ark didn't turn out to be such a good luck charm, and so they abandoned it. Word was that the ark was sitting at the home of Abinadab. Okay, so now back to our story. Without inquiring of God, I mean, why? This is going to be such a great idea. David decides this is the move. We need to bring back the ark. Imagine the parade, the euphoria among the people. I will be the one to retrieve the ark. He goes with a few men, 30,000. And he marches to the home of Abinadab. David demands that Abinadab produce the ark. Not surprisingly, Abinadab says, okay, 30,000 to 1. He gives up the ark. Now the parade begins. Do you notice that the ark is placed on a new ox cart to bring it back to David's new capital city? Two of Abinadab's sons are assigned to walk alongside the cart just in case something should happen. And the parade of 30,000 plus took off. God is gonna love this. They were singing songs, you heard, dancing with all their might, with lyres, harps, cymbals, and sistrums. Sistrums are castanets. Who even knew that Israel had castanets? What a parade. With the ark back in Jerusalem, Jerusalem would be the political center, the geographical center, and now the spiritual center. But somewhere along the parade route, this stupid lummox of an ox stumbles, and the ark just about falls off that new ox cart. And Uzzah, who was there for just such a reason, reaches out to stabilize the ark. And with that, God is so angry that he strikes Uzzah dead on the spot. I imagine this was a damper on the parade. So David stops the parade, sulks, and goes back to Jerusalem. And he barks out, just leave the thing over there. That precious symbol of God that I told you about, give it to, what's his name? That farm over there, Obed-Edom? I don't care. Yeah, just park it with him. And David goes back to Jerusalem, so angry that such a great idea had to go sour, and so angry with a God he didn't understand because he had such good intentions. So by now, we're all scratching our heads going, well, what on earth went wrong here? Well, we could start by reminding ourselves that the Old Testament will always remind us that God is in the details. And David had missed a really important detail, and that was, the rule was, the ark could only and always be carried on the back of priests, never on an ox cart. And even then, the priests weren't supposed to lay their hands on the box, by the way. They could only touch the poles that ran through some rings on the side of the box. So there's that. Exact letter of the law disobedience by David and his soldiers. But I don't think that's what angered God so much, because there's plenty of other times where David didn't follow the law and nothing happened. David, we already know, was outside the law in the number of wives he could marry. We also remember that one time David and his men were out battling and they got hungry, and the only thing to eat was the sacred showbread, remember? And he ate that. That was against the law. Nothing happened. So yes, it wasn't the letter of the law, but I don't think that's what angered God. I think the issue today is that David ran ahead of God. Did you see that there's no record of David praying to God about the plan? There was no asking of God, how do we get the ark back? There was just a plan made by David and an assumption that God's going to love my idea. Sometimes people are a step behind God, and that's a problem. They don't follow. Sometimes people think they can run ahead of God, and so God's job is now to catch up with them, and that's also a problem. The other problem here with this incident was Uzzah himself, who thought it was going to be his job to contain God on an ox cart. Hauling God around on an ox cart is always a bad plan, even if it is a new ox cart. Nor will God ever allow somebody to try to protect his holiness. God won't let Uzzah. God is not supposed to be protected. God is the protector. And frankly, it's this part of the story that always puzzles me, because I feel badly for Uzzah. He was just doing what he was told to do. He was just trying to help when he saw the ark starting to slip. I mean, why doesn't God strike David, the innovator, the guy dancing around with castanets? He's the one who hatched this whole idea in the first place. But maybe the text is trying to tell us that God is more offended by our carefulness than by our impulsiveness. Maybe because God is never overtly offended by mistakes or impulses as much as by our carelessness. When you slip into thinking that you have to take care of God, that you have to haul God around, that you have to protect God, that you have to, God is so delicate that he needs you. I think that's what gets God furious. So the issue is a plan gone wrong for a lot of reasons. And plans are okay. We all make plans, right? We need to. Plans to graduate, plans to get a degree, plans to get a job, a plan to purchase a new iPhone, a plan to get married, a plan to move ahead, a plan to retire. We have plans for our children. We have plans for our spouse. The church needs to have plans. Our government needs to have plans. Your boss tomorrow will want to know your plan for the week. Your company needs an annual business plan. All of that planning is good and it's necessary until planning slips into control. And when planning slips into control, that affects us spiritually. And when we start to assume that God is just another ingredient that has to be boxed into my plans, if we draw a solid line from my plans to God, and now you have to bless this plan, the story suggests you might be in for some disappointment. God is saying, I'm not going to be hauled around to follow your lead, safely contained on your ox cart, or another pawn that you're going to use as a strategy to use me to build a better life. That's not who I am. Do not pray for God to bless your plans. Pray for eyes to see the plan of God. Throughout your day, today, tomorrow, this week, God is going to be doing some incredible things. That's because His Spirit is alive, using you in your calling. But if your focus is only on your little box that you call your business meeting, your homework assignment, your classroom, or the dinner that has to be made, if that's your focus, then you're going to miss the miracle. And you'll be disappointed that God didn't contain Himself to the little box that you made for Him and the cart you put it on. Well, I know all of this is rather sobering, so I want to enjoy the end of the story. It was not read. It's how the story ends, and I wanted to whet your appetite. I hope you go home and rip open your Bible and read it for yourself, but I'm going to give you a spoiler. It ended with David going back to Jerusalem, sans the Ark of the Covenant. He's sulking. He overhears that because the ark is at the home of Obed-Edom, that God is now blessing Obed-Edom, the guy that he left the ark with. David takes some time, and he gets over, miraculously, this anger he had with God. His anger over the whole situation. He stops being angry about his disappointment. And action follows attitude. Do you know what David will do? He gallops back to the home of Obed-Edom, and this time he remembers to bring the priests who will properly carry the ark. And the parade reassembles and marches a second time. But the parade will take this time but 6 steps, and it's stopped again because David bows and prays, and he makes a sacrifice of one of those oxes before he goes back to Jerusalem. Think about this. Isn't this wonderful? The ox who caused the problem the first time, remember, the ox stumbled and so the ark was going to slip? David slays that ox, the symbol of everything that had gone wrong when he tried to get the ark. He slays the ox, plan A, so he can walk on. He leaves behind the ox and plan A, his disappointments with God, and the text will say he starts dancing again with his castanets before a God whose ways he does not understand, but a God who now he follows. Better said, before a God he doesn't understand and a God he decides he doesn't have to understand. All he does is trust. Sometimes people are behind God, and that's a problem. They don't follow. Sometimes people are ahead of God, thinking it's God's job to follow them, and that's also a problem. And our text says to us today, maybe you, like David, are running ahead of God, full steam to be sure. It's a great idea, I'll give you that. It's a dream that God will bless, it should bless, I give you that. It's such a good idea that it deserves parade and dancing and castanets. It was such an ingenious fit. You, so right and holy and perfect. Why even bother asking God about this? It would be an exercise in redundancy. But then, unbelievably, like a surreal dream, the plan fell through. The ark slipped. The idea crumbled. The relationship fell apart. The business failed. The grad school rejected you. And the disappointment was great. You're trying to get on with life, but the hurt follows you like an ox trudging behind you, involved in every new move you try to make. Maybe today, the Spirit is calling you to say, it's time to slay the ox. God invites you to a dance, but you're going to have to let go of the ox. For it's really hard to dance with an ox. Amen.